Welcome to History Nest, where the past whispers you to sleep. You awaken to the cold stone beneath your bare feet, the subtle smell of damp wool, and the lengthy shadows created by the flickering torchlight on the chamber walls where dusty tapestries hang. Similar to a blacksmith's forge, your heart hammers, with the exception of the distant howl of wind through arrow slits. Every beat reverberated in the quiet. Your body is still as slim as a reed at 12 years old. You are wearing a stiff brocade gown that irritates your skin and is adorned with strands that shimmer like captured moonlight, but make you feel like a prisoner. A man twice your age enters through the open door. The alcohol from the feast downstairs made his breath foul. The expectations of kingdoms cast a shade over his eyes. This is hardly a romantic dream. You are getting married tonight, and the fear coils like a serpent in your stomach, because tonight the alliances made with blood and ink are sealed with your innocence. Your body serves as a vehicle for unborn children. Failure also carries the whisper of shame, embarrassment, or worse, the anguish of a killed bed that could kill you before daybreak. Prior to delving into these lost tales of adversity and survival, consider clicking the like button and subscribing for more posts like this if you like discovering the little-known facts about the past. Additionally, kindly let me know where you're listening by leaving a comment below. It's amazing to me that we're studying these old tales from around the globe together, bound together by our mutual interest in the past and transcending time and location. A girl named Matilda stands motionless in the dark light of a solitary tallow candle, her tiny hands gripping the edge of a wooden box adorned with imperial eagles, the flames sputtering against the drafts that seep through the castle's ancient brickwork. She was born in the English royal court between the years of 100 to AD, and she had known from birth that her life was not her own. Instead of seeing a daughter to treasure, her father, King Henry I, who ruled over a territory that spanned from the foggy coasts of Normandy to the untamed highlands of Wales, regarded her as a pawn to forge alliances against the shifting tides of European power. At the young age of 7, envoys from the Holy Roman Empire reached the English court by 1109 AD with proposals from Emperor Henry V, a 20-something ambitious and battle-hardened man who wanted to marry his enormous territories to Thenglonorman throne. On April 10, 1110 AD, the betrothal was sealed in Utrecht, and Matilda was sent across the Channel to Germany, a country with tall cathedrals and thick forests, where the air was tinged with the strong tang of pine and the distant clang of blacksmiths making swords for countless battles. Under Archbishop Bruno of Trier's tutelage, she was taught the elaborate dances of court etiquette, the weight of a crown that would soon be placed on her forehead, and the guttural tones of the German language. What child could imagine the intimacy required of a wife, the surrender of her body to a stranger's touch? In a bedroom where privacy was a myth and witnesses lurked behind curtains to verify the validity of the union. But beneath the lessons in Latin prayers and embroidered silks, a silent fear grew, unspoken even in her private confessions to the chapel's stone saints. The wedding took place at the Grand Cathedral of Mainz on January 7, 1114 AD. Like the aspirations of the men who planned it, its arches soar, with her veil acting as a gossamer barrier against the staircase of assembled aristocrats from all over the empire. Matilda, now 12, came down the aisle in a garment of crimson velvet, thick with gold thread that chafed her flesh. There was a lot of incense in the air, its smoke tendrils curling around the altar as vows were exchanged in Latin. Words she knew but didn't really understand as a little girl. As the bells rang out throughout the Ree Valley, Henry V, tall and stern, his face scarred by campaigns against rebellious dukes, seized her hand in a hold that spoke of possession rather than fondness. As the procession arrived at the imperial palace, the underlying tension was concealed by feasts of spiced wine and roasted bear. That evening, in a room filled with tapestries of valiant victories, the truth came. As part of a tradition based on the period's fixation with legitimate heirs, servants stripped the bed of its linens in preparation for the ceremony that would demonstrate her purity and his strength. The cold air caused Asphylesh to rise on Matilda's arms, causing her breath to become shallow and her pulse to beat. The emperor came forward with the entitlement of a king used to authority, his breath thick with me. Her objections and tears are not documented in any chronicles. The power disparity was glaring, even when such weaknesses were removed from the record of history. A 12-year-old girl giving way to a 28-year-old guy whose body isn't prepared for the demands made of it, with consummation in the perspective of the empire, cemented the partnership. However, for Matilda, it was the first scar in a life of political scheming and the rubber of childhood. The marriage's failure to bear fruit tormented Matilda for years. When Henry V passed away childless at Utrecht on May 23, 1125 AD, leaving her a widow at the age of 23. Perhaps because of her youth or the emperor's health, which was hampered by the demands of continuous war, no successors had arrived. With the title of empress, an empty crown that increased her solitude, she returned to her father's court in Normandy. Her resolve in subsequent contests for the English throne was strengthened. Beremer's at court, however, during those early evenings when she was by herself thinking while silk sheets rustled, she was afraid not just of suffering, but also of not bearing the sons that dynasties required, a burden that would come to define her legacy. Another young eyes met a similar end over the channel in the sun-drenched vineyards of Aquitaine. The scent of lavender in blossom and the briny Atlantic breeze blended together in her narration. Born at the lavish court of Poitiers about 1122 AD, Ella inherited one of Europe's wealthiest duchies after her father passed away in 1137 AD, with eyes as piercing as a falcon's and auburn hair that fell like autumn leaves. She was a picture, off figure at the age of 15. But because of her fortune, she became a target, a prize that had to be won before competitors could take her. In order to unite the immense territories of Aquitaine, extending from the Pyrenees to the Lier, with the Capetian crown, King Louis of France, who was near death, arranged her marriage to his son Louis. In the Cathedral of Saint Tendre in Bordeaux, where the scent of beeswax, candles, and fresh rushes scattered on the floor blended with the summer heat, the union was hastily solemnized on July 25, 1137 AD, in front of a group of French and lords, their armor clinking quietly in the pews. Ilalana exchanged vows while wearing a coat of sapphire blue silk embroidered with her house's golden lions. with his hands shaking as he put the ring on her finger. Louis, a 17-year-old religious boy with a pale complexion from his monastic upbringing, appeared more like a monk than a king. Even though the feast that followed was filled with melodies and roasted peacocks, Elenina's thoughts kept going back to the chamber that was waiting for them, with its canopied bed serving as a reminder of the responsibilities that were ahead. The couple was escorted to their accommodations by attendants as dusk descended, illuminating the Gironde River with lengthy shadows. Priests blessed the mattress, and courtiers toasted their fertility with goblets of Hippocrates, a spiced wine that burnt as it descended in a bedding ceremony as ancient as the feudal ties it strengthened. As the beautiful linen clung to Eleanor's skin in the humid air, her heart fluttered beneath her camise. Uncomfortable and inexperienced, Louis hesitantly approached, his church-centered dedication at odds with the sensual demands of monarchy. Chronicles allude to his hesitation. Eleanor was under a great deal of strain to navigate the night's intimacies with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, possibly due to theological disputes that saw pleasure as sin. Her position was unstable without sons, and her duchy was susceptible to annulment or seizure. The marriage produced solely daughters for years. Louis's uncertainties and Elenina's annoyances were fueled by Marie in 1145 AD and Alex in 1150 AD. Rumor circulated in the Parisian court that her vivacious personality conflicted with his religious beliefs. In contrast to his prayers and fasts, she loved hunting and poetry. Tensions erupted in Antioch during the Second Crusade, which lasted from 1147 to 1149 AD. There were unfounded rumors that she had an affair with her uncle Ramon. By 1152 AD, the marriage was dissolved at Beaugency, close to Orléans, on the grounds of consanguinity, which served as a handy cover for more serious problems. A few weeks later, on May 18, 1152 AD, Elenina, aged 30, remarried Henry II of England at Poitiers, giving birth to 8 children and influencing the Angevin Empire. Her worries had been changed into ambition, and she had come out stronger. But the anxiety was unadulterated on that first night in Bordeaux. The weight of bearing children in a society that valued women based on the number of sons they produced, the anxiety of being embraced by a stranger, and the unsaid terror of the dangers of childbirth, where blood and fever took as many lives. As combat swords, as Queen of France, and then England, Eleanor would be known for her tenacity. However, the fragility of that wedding night persisted, casting a shadow over her renowned self-reliance. A distinct story was told far to the north, among the foggy coastlines of Flanders. One of rebellion amidst the bustle of looms, producing the area's renowned textiles. The heir to sea salt and freshly dyed wool, Matilda was born in the year 1031. AD to Count Baldwin v. Ove Flanders and Adela of France. She grew up in a court full of diplomats and merchants. William, Duke of Normandy, a bastard son who rose to power out of sheer rage, took notice of her by the time she was in her late teens. He was not allowed to participate in numerous noble matches because of his illegitimacy. Matilda first refused him, saying she would marry no bastard, but was dragged through Bruges' muddy streets by her hair until she gave in, according to legends, stitched by later chroniclers like the elaborate border of a tapestry. This was written off as fiction by historians who blamed it on Norman propaganda. The truth, however, has its own drama, because they were distant cousins who disregarded church rules against consanguinity, which were intended to prevent inbred relationships. Their baptism in 1049 AD attracted papal attention. At the Council of Reims in 1049 AD, Pope Leo X forbade the union, causing a delay that tried William's patience. At 20 feet, Matilda's quarters were brimming with the aroma of lavender sachets to soothe anxious nerves. Her ladies-in-waiting whispered that the Duke's fury was tempered by the crucible of Norman uprisings, and that disobeying Rome would result in excommunication, a spiritual demise in a time when salvation was the most important thing. In 1051 AD, the wedding eventually took place, most likely at Eu in Normandy. It was a private event during the ban, with vows being exchanged in a chapel with a view of the canal's churning waves. Under the shadow of church disfavor, the consummation took place that evening in a hall where hearths crackled with oak logs. Matilda's Flemish linen gown, which felt comfortable against her skin, gave way to the reality of married responsibility. Her husband's rough hands serve as a reminder of his life as a warrior. Fear showed up as uncertainty rather than violence. Would the dynasty be doomed if the Pope's curse made their children illegitimate? They obtained permission from Pope Nicholas II in 1059 AD and established two abbeys in Caen, the Abbey Vims and Abigello d'Armes, to placate the church. Matilda had 9 or 10 children, including Henry I and William Rufus. Her fertility was a victory over early concerns. In 106 AD, she became Duchess and then Queen, ruling Normandy while William was away. Her seal is a symbol of collective authority on charters. However, the uneasiness of the wedding night reverberated in her subsequent disputes, such as the argument over their son Robert Charus in 1079 AD, where political demands caused familial ties to deteriorate. Matilda confessed to sins in her last days at Caen in 1083 AD, maybe including her early reservations. She died on November 2nd, leaving William devastated, and 4 years later he met his own demise. Around 1295 AD, Isabella, the daughter of King Philip IV of France and Joan I of Navarre, came into the world, moving eastward to the lavish halls of Paris, where the waters of the Seine lapped against stone caves filled with spices from far-off ports. She represented the grace of the Capetian bloodline, fair-haired, intelligent, and destined for a throne. She was raised in Thespelder of the Louvre, with its gardens blooming in the spring and its halls resonating with minstrels' wealth. Negotiations cemented her doom by 1307 AD after Philip's aggressive incursions. The marriage to Edward II of England was an attempt to patch up strained relations over Gascony, the final English foothold in France. In January 1308 AD, Isabella crossed the Channel at the age of 12 in order to dock at Boulogne-Samari. Her ship is fighting winter gales. On January 25th, the wedding took place in the town's cathedral, with the gleam of farmward nights and the scent of frankincense filling the nave. Isabella and Edward, a 23-year-old man with Plantagenet features softened by a love of theater and fine arts, exchanged vows while Isabella wore a silver tissue gown covered in gauze. Joy, however, curled quickly. Isabella remained on the sidelines, her uncles furious at the insult, while Edward lavished extravagant gifts on his favorite, Piers Gaveston, during the supper instead of on his wife. In the midst of this tension, the wedding night took place in a room heated by braziers that were blazing with charcoal, while priests whispered blessings. Attendants made the beds and draped the front poster bed. The cold breeze against her skin, the weight of Edward's apathy, and his faraway gaze, as though imagining another, all contributed to Isabella's obvious terror. His predilection for Gaveston was mentioned in chronicles, suggesting a lack of that left the marriage unfulfilling that night. Her loneliness was heightened by Platoka rumors. Her status was precarious because she had no immediate heirs. Her body was inspected for indications of pregnancy. Resentment festered despite the arrival of Edward III in 1312 AD and 3 more children at Windsor. He was dispatched to France in 1325 AD to broker a peace deal. Isabella declined to go back out of concern that Edward's new favor, the Despensers, would kill her. She invaded England in 1326 AD with Roger Mortimer as an ally, overthrowing Edward II and reigning as regent until her son took over in 1330 AD. Although she had a quiet influence in her later years at Castle Rising in Norfolk until her death. On August 22, 1358 AD, the humiliation she endured on the wedding night left her damaged, which fueled the metamorphosis of a queen from pawn to player. On March 23, 1430 AD, Margaret was born to Renée of Anjou and Isabella of Lérins in the lush fields of Anjou, where the Lier River meandered through vineyards laden with grapes like a silver thread. She was equipped for a part in the complex web of European diplomacy by her upbringing in the midst of the Renaissance's stirrings of scholarship and art. In an attempt to broker a truce, English diplomats proposed her marriage to King Henry VI, a devout but brittle ruler, in 1444 AD as the 100 Years' War was coming to a standstill. Margaret was a symbol of peace at the age of 15. Her meager dowry of 20,000 francs was countered by the main session. On April 9, 1445 AD, she landed in Portsmouth, England. Cheering throngs and the saline temps of the Solent welcomed the ship. The wedding took place at Hampshire's Titchfield Abbey on April 23. Vows were exchanged in front of an altar covered in white samite in a modest Cistercian home. With her black hair wrapped in pearls and wearing a satin dress with embroidery, Margaret turned to face Henry, a sweet 23-year-old man whose hands were soft from prayer rather than a sword. The meal included delicate details, such as sugar carvings of lions and eagles. But there were also political undertones and a complex arrangement that attracted attention. That night, in the abbey's guest quarters, with walls echoing the monks chanting the consummation drek, Henry's mental fragility, predicting his latter breakdowns, may have softened the meeting. His touch cautious among the aroma of beeswax and herbs strewn on the floor. Margaret's fears revolved around the unknown, a distant country, a spouse who was prone to saintly abstractions, and the necessity of having children in a divided court. There was no subsequent pregnancy. Only in 1453 AD did their son Edward arrive at Westminster, amidst illegitimacy allegations stoked by Henry's Catania. She was crushed by the political weight of the marriage. She called councils at Coventry. By 1455 AD, while serving as regent during Henry's insanity, and her choices sparked the Wars of the Roses. Margaret was imprisoned until she was ransomable to France in 1475 AD. She lost at Tewkesbury in 1471 AD. Her son was killed, Henry was assassinated, and she died penniless at Dampier-sur-Loire on August 25, 1482 AD. The silent anxieties of her wedding night grew into a lifetime of conflict. That first vulnerability was the forging of her determination. At Bleo Castle in Bedfordshire, Margaret Buffett's narrative began on May 31, 443 AD. Deep in the Welsh marches, where mist clung to the valleys like a shroud, descended from John of Gaunt's legitimized line, she acquired huge lands, making her a prized ward. To support Lancastrian claims, King Henry Vigover to his half-brother Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, about 1455 AD. On November 1, 1455 AD, Margaret married at the age of 12, most likely in her home in Lamp, Pembrokeshire. The ceremony was modest given the possibility of Yorkist unrest. The smell of peat smoke and dried rosemary filled the room, which was illuminated by rush lights that flickered in iron holders. Battle-trained and 24, Edmund quickly consummated the marriage. Dynastic needs drove his urgency. Margaret was viscerally terrified. The agony of a childlike body, the icy perspiration on her forehead, and the anxiety of what this action hinted at. She was pregnant by the beginning of 1456 AD and was left a widow when Edmund died of the plague at Curran Castle on November 3rd. On January 28, 1457 AD, she worked alone at Pembroke Castle. Her 13-year-old body suffered from excruciating pain that left her permanently scarred and eventually rendered infertile. Her sole child was her son Henry, who would go on to become king. In 1458 AD, she remarried Henry Stafford for safety at Maxstoke Castle, and in 1472 AD, she strategically remarried Thomas Stanley at Knowsley Hall. She made her way between the rose thorns, planning Henry's climb. She had established colleges and molded Tudor England by the time of her death at Westminster on June 29 AD. But the shadow of the wedding night persisted, a reminder of the brutality of the time. These historical fables expose the unseen atrocities concealed behind glittering crowns. Fear was the unexpected visitor on nights when queens were restrained by the iron grip of duty. Their spirits were put to the proof in the furnace of expectation, and their bodies were traded for power. The human heart pulses defiantly against the night, even in the quiet of a medieval chamber, as evidenced by the resilience that emerges from such darkness and reverberates down the ages. If you enjoyed this journey through history, make sure to subscribe to History Nest, where every night a new story takes flight.